If this story moved you, subscribe for more human stories from the stars.
They didn't invite the human to speak. They invited the human to wait. That alone should tell you how afraid the galaxy already was. The Death World Council chamber floated in silence, a ring of species that had survived planets designed to kill them. Acid oceans, crushing gravity, skies that rained metal. Each delegate bore scars of evolution and war, and yet every one of them kept glancing at the same empty chair. Not the throne at the center, not the holographic battlefield hovering above the floor. The standby seat. It was smaller than the others. No ceremonial markings, no insignia. Just a simple, human-made alloy chair, bolted directly to the floor, as if someone once feared it might be thrown. Or used. No one spoke of why it existed, not officially. But every species in that room knew the rule. If the standby light turns green, the council is already too late. The counselors argued anyway. They always did. This dispute does not warrant escalation, hissed the Zalrith envoy, mandibles clicking in agitation. The Vornath crossed a border moon, nothing more. Nothing more, the stone-skinned Celt rumbled. They sterilized the biosphere in under an hour. Murmurs spread, tension tightened. The hologram flickered, showing a once-living world reduced to gray silence. Still, no one touched the standby console, because once you involve a human, you don't end a conflict, you redefine it. At the far edge of the chamber, beyond the circle of power, a single figure stood behind transparent shielding. No armor, no weapons visible, just a human in a dark uniform, hands calmly folded behind their back. Commander Elias Rowe, Earth Defense Coalition. Status: on standby. He had been there for 6 hours, motionless, patient. That scared them more than any war fleet ever had. Humans were not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the longest lived, but they came from a world classified as a Category 15 death world, a planet where survival itself was a daily act of defiance. Predators everywhere, diseases that adapted faster than medicine, natural disasters that erased cities overnight. And humans? They didn't just survive it. They evolved to end threats. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The standby console flickered. Yellow. Not green. Not yet. But every counselor froze, knowing what came next if diplomacy failed. Because the moment that light turned green, the human wouldn't ask for permission. He'd ask only one question. Who do you want left standing? The human reached the child just as the first mercenary aimed his weapon directly at them. Marek's hand tightened around his pulse rifle. Was this some kind of suicide mission? But instead of shooting the mercenary, the human dropped to one knee. The child, who had been terrified, suddenly reached up, grasping his hand. The movement was quick, intentional. "I've got you," the human said softly, his voice carrying over the sound of chaos. His words weren't to the mercenaries, they were to the child. Marek felt a chill run down his spine. In the middle of the firefight, amidst the carnage, this human had chosen to prioritize a life, one that wasn't his own. The child clung to him, her trembling body pulling him toward safety as the human shielded her with his own back. Marek could feel the weight of every moment as his squad kept low, unwilling to take a shot. It wasn't just a gamble, it was a statement. The human's calmness in the face of certain death was unnerving. The squad watched, transfixed. Their training screamed at them to engage, to eliminate the threat. But this defied every rule they had been taught. This wasn't strategy, it was humanity. "Who is this guy?" Ash muttered again, his words barely audible. "I don't know, But I think we need to know. Marek's voice was quiet, tense. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shook as a low roar reverberated through the street. A heavy shuttle, more menacing than any warship they had seen, hovered overhead. The squad's instincts kicked in as they hit the dirt, but Marek's eyes never left the human, who now stood face to face with the mercenary leader. And that's when Marek realized this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about something much deeper.
The shuttle's engines roared, shaking the air around them as it deployed a dozen heavily armored soldiers to the ground. Their footsteps were thunderous, and the sound of their boots against the pavement was a death knell. Every soldier moved with precision, their weapons drawn. But the human didn't flinch. He stood firm, holding the alien child protectively in front of him as if he had no fear. "Get down!" Marek barked, instinctively reaching for his squad's comms. But no one moved. They were all too focused on the scene unfolding in front of them. "Does he really think he can stop them?" Ash said under his breath, his eyes locked on the human. Marek didn't answer. He was still processing the unbelievable image of the human standing his ground. One of the soldiers, the leader, judging by his posture, stepped forward, his alien features snarling with contempt. He leveled his weapon at the human, but before he could fire, the human spoke. "Do it. If you think it'll change anything, then pull the trigger," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. The squad was silent, the tension in the air palpable. The mercenaries hesitated. There was a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. This human wasn't like any other they had faced before. There was something more, something they couldn't understand. The leader of the mercenaries sneered. "You're a fool. You think we'll just walk away because of some broken child?" "I don't care what you think," the human replied, voice low but full of conviction. The alien paused, scanning him. His eyes flickered toward the child, still hiding behind the human's arm, and for the briefest moment, something seemed to shift in his demeanor. Marek felt a strange tension in the air, a battle of wills. And then it happened. The mercenary leader slowly lowered his weapon.
Marek couldn't believe what he was seeing. The alien mercenary had lowered his weapon, but there was no mistaking the grim resolve in his posture. The squad, still hidden behind their cover, exchanged bewildered glances. This wasn't how these situations played out. Not like this. The human, still gripping the child's hand, didn't move an inch. His calm demeanor remained, as though he had already won. The mercenary leader's hesitation spoke volumes, but it didn't make sense. Why would he spare the life of a human, let alone someone who had been so willing to stand in his path? "Let's go," the leader finally muttered, his voice low and full of venom. "You may have saved her life, human, but don't think we won't return for you." His words lingered in the air, a promise more than a threat. With a last glance at the human, the mercenaries retreated, their heavy boots echoing as they moved toward the shuttle. The roar of the engines began again as they ascended, disappearing into the sky. But the human didn't watch them leave. His attention remained focused on the child, who was still trembling at his side. Marek felt his pulse quicken as he slowly began to rise from his crouch. "What just happened?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Ash's reply came in a confused murmur. "I don't know, but I don't think we've seen the end of this." The human, still kneeling, turned to the child and whispered something in her native tongue. A soft smile appeared on her face, a fleeting moment of peace. But it didn't last. "She's not going to be the only one in danger," Marek muttered, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation. The human's actions had shifted the balance of power here. Now the squad wasn't the only target. The entire planet might be. "We need to get back to base now," Marek ordered. But as he started to move, the human slowly turned his head, his eyes locking with Marek's. There was no fear in his gaze, only an unshakable resolve. And that was when it hit Marek. This wasn't just about the child. This was about something much bigger. As Merrick's squad moved toward the extraction point, the feeling of unease lingered like a thick fog. Every step felt heavy, weighed down by the events they had just witnessed. They had expected a routine mission, take out a group of mercenaries, secure the area, and leave. But this was something else entirely. "What the hell was that back there?" Ash finally broke the silence, his voice tense with frustration. "I've seen crazy things, but that human didn't just save a child. He saved all of us, and I don't even know why." Merrick didn't have an answer. His mind kept replaying the moment the mercenaries had retreated. It made no sense. The leader of the mercenaries had been ready to kill. They all had been. But something had shifted. Something had happened in that moment of hesitation, and Merrick could feel the weight of it in his bones. "They're coming back," Merrick muttered, almost to himself. He didn't know how he knew it, but he felt it deep in his gut. There was no way they would just let this go. "We need to move faster," Ash urged, his voice strained with urgency. The sound of distant engines cut through the air, growing louder with every second. Merrick nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. The extraction point was still a good few clicks away. They had no choice but to keep pushing forward, but every muscle in his body screamed that they weren't going to make it in time. And then, as if on cue, a shadow loomed over them. Merrick looked up, his heart sinking. The mercenaries were back. This time there was no hesitation. The shuttle descended swiftly, dropping an entire platoon of soldiers. They spread out in an instant, forming a perimeter around the squad, their weapons raised and aimed with deadly precision. Merrick's team immediately fell into defensive positions, their weapons at the ready. But there was no order to fire yet. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. The mercenary leader stepped forward, his expression grim. "You should have stayed out of this, human," he growled, his voice dripping with malice. "Now you've made it personal." The human, who had been walking quietly behind the squad, didn't even flinch at the mercenary's words. He kept his eyes on the child, who was still clutching his hand, her face now hidden against his side. Merrick's pulse quickened as he studied the scene before him. The mercenaries were clearly intent on finishing what they had started, but the human, he wasn't backing down. He was standing between them and the child, an impenetrable wall of resolve. "You'll have to go through me," the human finally spoke, his voice calm but fierce. The mercenary leader smirked. "We plan to." Before Merrick could react, a bright flash of light erupted from the human side. A pulse rifle, much more advanced than the standard military model, emerged, its barrel glowing faintly. The human's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot was swift, accurate, and just like that, the first mercenary fell, his body crumpling to the ground in a heap. The squad was frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. The human had just taken down one of the mercenaries with a single shot. The entire situation had shifted again, and now it was clear. The human wasn't just protecting the child, he was ready to go to war. And the battle had only just begun. The mercenaries froze. For a split second, there was nothing but the crackling silence of the battlefield, the air heavy with tension. Merrick's team could feel the shift, the sudden realization that this wasn't just another fight. This was personal. The mercenary leader snarled, his eyes narrowing as he leveled his weapon at the human. But before he could react, the rest of his soldiers sprang into action. Weapons fired, plasma bolts lighting up the sky like streaks of fire. The human dove to the side, dragging the child with him, using the terrain for cover. "Move, now!" Merrick shouted, snapping his team into action. The squad fired in quick, calculated bursts, trying to suppress the mercenaries' advance, but they were outnumbered, and the mercenaries had superior firepower. Merrick's heart raced as he scanned the situation. The human was fast, faster than anyone could have predicted. He was darting from cover to cover, firing with precision, all while keeping the child safe. It was as if he had become a force of nature, unwavering, relentless, and impossible to stop.
But Marek couldn't afford to admire the humans' courage. They needed to get out of there. The mercenaries were closing in. They couldn't fight this many at once. "We need an exit plan," Ash yelled, his voice strained. "Now!" Marek's eyes flicked to the horizon. The shuttle was still hovering above, its engines sputtering as it prepared to leave. The mercenaries were regrouping, but their leader, he hadn't moved. He was still watching the human. There was something in his gaze, something that made Marek's skin crawl. "Cover the retreat," Marek ordered. "We're taking the child. We're leaving." The squad moved as one, firing on the mercenaries to force them back. They had no intention of sticking around to fight to the last man. But the human, he wasn't running. He was still standing firm, his weapon raised, eyes locked on the mercenary leader. "Why won't he move?" Ash murmured, confusion thick in his voice. Marek didn't answer. He was too focused on the human's unwavering stance. There was almost tragic in it. The human wasn't just trying to survive. He was making a stand, one that could cost him everything. The mercenary leader stepped forward, his eyes burning with fury. He didn't care about the child anymore. He didn't care about anything but destroying the human who had dared to defy him. "You really think you can stop me?" the leader growled. "You're just a human." The human didn't flinch. His voice was cold as ice when he spoke again. "I don't have to stop you. I just have to make sure you remember me." And then it happened. The human fired again, the shot ringing out, and the leader staggered back, a surprised grunt escaping his lips. His armor body had absorbed the impact, but it was clear that the human had landed a hit. That small victory only made the mercenary more furious. He roared, raising his weapon, ready to end it all. But in that moment of madness, the squad saw their chance. Marek signaled for the retreat, and with a last, lingering glance at the human, they began to move. But the human, he wasn't retreating. He stood there, face set, eyes burning with a fire that seemed to ignite the very air around him. Marek could only watch as the human faced the oncoming storm, unwilling to budge. "God help him," Ash muttered under his breath.
The chaos exploded around them. Plasma fire lit up the sky like fireworks gone wrong, streaking across the air in deadly arcs. Marek's squad sprinted toward the extraction point, their boots pounding against the ground, hearts racing with every step. But Marek couldn't help looking back at the human, standing alone in the battlefield. The mercenary leader's fury was palpable, his movements faster and more violent as he closed the gap between him and the human. Marek's mind raced. He should be focused on the mission, on getting the child to safety, but he couldn't shake the image of that human, facing certain death with the same quiet defiance that had kept him standing this whole time. "We can't leave him behind," Ash said, his voice cracking through the squad comms. "We need to help him." "Focus," Marek snapped, though his own words sounded hollow even to him. They couldn't afford to get caught in a battle they couldn't win, not now. But even as he said it, the nagging feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. Something had shifted in Marek. This wasn't just about the mission anymore. But there was no time to think it through. The mercenaries were closing in fast. They needed to make it to the shuttle before it took off. Marek grabbed the child's hand, urging her forward, but she resisted, looking back at the human, her eyes wide with fear. "No, no, we can't leave him," she cried out, her voice trembling with desperation. Marek's chest tightened, the words of the human echoing in his mind. "I just have to make sure you remember me." But how could they leave him behind? How could they just abandon someone who had thrown everything away to save them? The squad hesitated, their steps faltering, but Marek knew what needed to be done. "We keep moving," he said, his voice firm. "We can't let them take us down too. If we survive this, we come back for him." "But," Ash started to protest. "No time," Marek cut him off. "We go, now." But even as he said it, something deep inside him refused to accept it. They couldn't just leave him behind. That human, he had given everything. Marek didn't know why, but he couldn't let it end like this. And then, just as they reached the extraction point, a voice crackled over the comms. It was the human's voice. "Get to the shuttle,"
Now! Marek froze in his tracks. The voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, like he knew what was coming. "What do you mean now?" Marek asked, his voice tight with concern. There was a long pause before the human answered. "I'm not asking you to come back for me. I'm asking you to survive. Don't make the same mistake I did." The message hit Marek like a physical blow. The gravity of it settled over him like a storm cloud. The human was sacrificing himself, not for glory, not for recognition, but for them, for the squad, for the child. Marek's mind raced. Could he leave him behind? Was there any way to fight this? To go back and make sure that the human survived? The mercenary leader's voice cut through his thoughts, a low growl of victory. "It's too late for you, human. You should have stayed out of this." "I never had a choice," the human's voice responded, calm, defiant. The shuttle's engines roared, the sound of safety getting further and further away.
The shuttle's ramp was just inches from closing when Marek heard it, the unmistakable sound of plasma fire erupting from the battlefield. His body stiffened, and for a moment time seemed to slow. He could see the human, a silhouette in the distance, still standing his ground, fighting with everything he had. The child, the squad, none of it mattered anymore. All Marek could think about was that voice, steady even in the face of death, urging him to leave. "Why?" Marek muttered to himself. "Why sacrifice it all?" The squad had made it to safety, the shuttle's engines whining as they powered up, but Marek wasn't in the clear. His eyes locked on the horizon, where the battle raged on. He felt the weight of the decision in his chest, a pressure that threatened to crush him. Every part of him screamed to go back, to fight, to save the human. But the ramp was closing, the shuttle's engines were screaming for takeoff, and he couldn't change the course of events that had already unfolded. But then the human's voice cut through his thoughts again. "Don't make the same mistake I did." Marek clenched his fists. He had a choice to make. The shuttle lurched as it began its ascent, the mercenaries below seeming like ants in the distance. He could feel the shift in the air, the bitter taste of regret already settling in his mouth. He'd left someone behind, a man who had chosen a path of sacrifice, knowing full well it could mean his death. That sacrifice was no longer just about saving a child. It was about saving something far bigger. "What do we do now?" Ash's voice was barely a whisper, filled with the same confusion and doubt that had plagued Marek for the past few minutes. "We survive," Marek said flatly, turning away from the view of the battlefield below. But his voice lacked conviction. The truth was, he didn't know if they could survive with this kind of guilt hanging over them. The child, still clinging to Marek's side, looked up at him. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else that Marek couldn't place. "He's not dead," she said softly, as if she could sense his doubt. "He's not. He's going to make sure of it." Marek's eyes widened. Her words hung in the air like a prophecy. A gut feeling twisted inside him. What if she was right? The human wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. As the shuttle continued its ascent, the last of the battlefield grew distant. Marek couldn't tear his eyes away from the darkened ground below, hoping, praying that somehow, against all odds, the human would survive. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. The fight wasn't finished yet. And neither was the human. Hours passed. The shuttle's engines hummed steadily as they flew farther away from the carnage. The squad sat in tense silence, the weight of their decisions pressing on every one of them. The child had fallen asleep against Marek, her small form curled up, her breathing soft but heavy. But for Marek, sleep was impossible. His mind replayed the scene over and over, each time a new question gnawing at him. Had they made the right choice? Was there still a chance for the human to survive? Or had they left him to die? Marek couldn't shake the image of the human standing alone against the mercenaries. His resolve, his selflessness, it had all been so unexpected. The human had chosen to fight, not for honor or glory, but for the life of a child, for them. But Marek had abandoned him.
And now they were soaring above a battlefield that the human might still be in. His heart clenched. "We should have gone back," Ash spoke up from across the shuttle. His voice was quiet, almost defeated. Marek nodded, guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders. "We didn't have a choice." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. There was always a choice, and he had chosen to live, to save the child, to escape. But at what cost? "We couldn't have saved him," Marek muttered, almost to himself. He was trying to convince himself more than Ash, but it wasn't working. His mind kept running in circles. He couldn't shake the feeling that the human wasn't done yet, that somehow, in the chaos, in the middle of certain death, he had won. "We don't know that," Ash replied. His voice was full of doubt, but there was an edge of hope in it too. "You saw him, Marek. He was different. He was ready to die, but he wasn't afraid. Whatever happens, he's not the kind of man who gives up." Marek looked over at Ash, surprised by the conviction in his voice. Ash was right. The human hadn't been afraid. He hadn't been scared of the mercenaries or of dying. He had been scared of something else, the possibility that they might forget him, that they might not remember the kind of person he was. That thought hit Marek with a punch to the gut. What if the human had made his stand not just for the child, but to make sure that the world knew what humanity was capable of, that they could fight, sacrifice, and survive against impossible odds? The shuttle's comms crackled, drawing Marek's attention. "Marek, are you there?" It was the voice of their commanding officer, crackling through the static. Marek's pulse quickened. "What is it, sir?" "Marek, we've got intel that the mercenaries have regrouped. They're already moving again, and they've got a new target." Marek's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying?" "They've targeted the city, the one you just left." Marek's mind raced. The city, the one where the human had made his stand. The mercenaries were coming back, and they were angry. "There's no way," Marek whispered, barely believing his own words. "They wouldn't, he wouldn't." But even as he spoke, a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The human knew the mercenaries would come back. He hadn't just stayed behind to fight. He had been protecting something bigger, something more important, the city. Marek's eyes met Ash's, and in that instant, they both knew what they had to do. "We're going back," Marek said, his voice filled with a fierce determination. "We're not leaving this to chance."
The shuttle turned sharply, its engines roaring in protest as it altered course. The sky outside went from blue to dark, the sun dipping low beneath the horizon, casting the world below in shadow. The squad was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their decision heavy on their shoulders. They weren't sure if they were heading into a battle they could win or a grave they couldn't escape. But Marek knew one thing for certain. They couldn't leave it like this. The mercenaries were on their way, targeting the same city where they had left the human behind. But now, that wasn't the most important thing. What mattered was that they had to stop this war from spreading. They had to show the mercenaries that humanity wasn't something to be ignored, that they wouldn't let themselves be crushed underfoot. As the shuttle descended back toward the city, Marek's thoughts were consumed by the human. He had no idea what had happened since their departure, but there was one thing he was certain of. The human wasn't done fighting. When the shuttle's wheels hit the ground, Marek was the first to leap out, pulse rifle in hand. The city was eerily quiet, the streets deserted. Smoke rose in the distance, and the faint hum of machinery told them that the mercenaries had begun their assault. The sky above was filled with the silhouette of enemy ships, hovering like vultures waiting for their prey. "We'll need to move fast," Ash said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Take them out before they can get to the city center." Marek nodded, but his eyes kept scanning the horizon. His mind was split between the mission and the human, who he knew was still out there. He couldn't shake the thought that somehow he was closer than they realized.
As the squad moved into position, they saw flashes of movement in the distance. Figures darted between abandoned buildings. Mercenaries. The fight was already underway. Marek took the lead, signaling his team to follow. They advanced cautiously, using the wreckage of destroyed vehicles for cover. But with each step, Marek's unease grew. There was something else in the air, something bigger. And then a burst of plasma fire illuminated the street ahead. A single figure stood tall against the mercenary onslaught. A human. It was him. Marek's heart pounded in his chest. There was no mistaking it. The same man who had sacrificed everything to save them was back. The human didn't seem to notice them at first, his focus entirely on the mercenaries as he fired with deadly accuracy. Plasma bolts streaked across the street, cutting through enemy armor with a precision that left the mercenaries reeling. But what struck Marek the most wasn't just the human's deadly accuracy. It was the way he moved, like a storm, relentless and unstoppable. The human turned then, his eyes locking on to Marek's. There was no fear in his gaze, only recognition. "You came back," the human said, his voice calm, almost surprised. Marek's heart tightened. "We didn't have a choice." The human gave a small smile. "You never did." Before Marek could respond, the battle escalated again. More mercenaries poured into the street, their ships landing with thundering force. This time they had come prepared, much more than before. The human glanced toward the incoming reinforcements. He knew this fight wasn't over. "They won't stop," the human said, his voice now fierce with determination. "But neither will we." Marek nodded, his resolve hardening. He had learned a lesson today. You don't leave people behind, not when they fight for something bigger than themselves. The human hadn't just saved a child or defended a city. He had fought for the future, for humanity's place in this universe. And now, Marek would fight with him. "Let's finish this," Marek said, his voice low, filled with conviction. The squad moved as one, engaging the mercenaries head-on, their weapons roaring to life. The human was with them, his movements flawless, deadly, and unstoppable. Together they fought as one, humanity's spirit unbreakable in the face of impossible odds. As the last mercenary fell, the dust settled. The city was saved, and the human, no longer just a lone soldier, had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of. Not just in the face of battle, but in the face of sacrifice. The squad stood victorious, breathing heavily, their minds and hearts forever changed by the human who had shown them the true meaning of courage. Marek turned to the human, now standing calmly amidst the wreckage, the child by his side. "You didn't need us," Marek said, his voice filled with respect. The human smiled, his eyes gleaming with a quiet pride. "Maybe, but it's always better when we fight together." And as the sun set over the battlefield, the world knew the human had not only survived, they had rewritten the rules of the universe. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before, but now they knew better.